Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of the Prison to Promise podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Craig Waleed. Today, I have the honor of sharing a conversation with an incredibly talented and courageous guest, Anya-Kara Shraddha. Anya-Kara is a visual artist whose journey through incarceration led to a deep and powerful relationship with creative expression. In this episode, we talk about how art helped her survive the emotional weight of confinement, how it became a form of resistance and communication, and how her work now uplifts the voices of those impacted by the carceral system. Anya-Kara opens up about the themes that shape her pieces: trauma, vulnerability, strength, and above all, the pursuit of freedom. This conversation is a moving reminder that creativity can not only heal but also challenge systems, inspire change, and reconnect us to our humanity. So let's dive in and hear from Anya-Kara Shraddha, whose story and art continue to light the way for others on the path from prison to promise. Now let's go. Thank you for joining me on this platform, Prison to Promise, where we capture stories of people who are currently or previously incarcerated to talk about what promise means to them and what hope means to them and what success looks like for them, with hopes of encouraging other people who are coming behind. So, again, thank you. I guess just starting off, I'd like to ask you if you can maybe share a bit about your personal journey, i.e., where you're from, what led you to begin creating art, especially during or after incarceration.
Sure, sure. Well, first I want to say thank you for having me and for creating this platform. I think it is such a big, has such an impact when you hear people who have lived a life and their story versus being told from someone who's never lived something, what you should be doing or how you should be doing it. That there's a certain magic that happens when somebody's speaking from lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
So my story. I grew up military. My father was a professor in the military, so we traveled around to different military bases, and I had a good upbringing, and really learned a lot about what community means when you're living that transient lifestyle. It really asks of you to redefine what family means, because you're very often not close to your nuclear family. And that's been really a big impact in my life of finding and creating community no matter where I've ended up being. Yeah. So I did not enter that jail cell as Anya-Kara. I entered as Claire when I was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. And there are a few things that made my experience incarcerated a bit unique, I feel like. The first being that at the time of the accident, I had been working in the restorative justice field, and so had a very different perspective around the justice system and our role as a society in both its formation and already part of a community that was fighting to change it. So that shifted my narrative around what it meant to be incarcerated in the first place, which really impacted my well-being going into that experience. I'd also had a background working in conflict resolution and addiction recovery as a peer recovery mentor, and a life coach and other healing modalities that just provided me with a foundation of tools to pull from, to cope and to process through a traumatic experience that aren't normal in our society. They aren't part of our educational system. They aren't aspects that were just baked into our way of learning. And so having access to those tools, not as something brand new, but as practices that I had used for over a decade, really also supported me in ways that are indescribable. You can't put a finite definition on what those practices can give. And it really being there put me face to face with the discrepancy between having those skills and not having those skills. What it allows you to be able to even think is possible, what is to be able to hold, to experience. And when you don't have them, what you're then limited to. And then additionally, the thing that made my time incarcerated different was that the person who died in the accident was my son, Liam. And as a parent, that is our greatest heartbreak.
Yeah.
And so for me, the greatest consequence is something that I live with and I face every moment of every day. Each moment I'm confronted with my failure to keep him safe. And so there really was no decision that was going to be made in a court system that could add to or detract from, for me, what the true consequence of that moment was. And for many people, I've heard that being incarcerated gave them some time to sit down, some space away, sometimes to think things through and to process, to understand and to begin to form how they want to live with what has happened. For me, that process had already happened, had already started. I didn't need time away to reckon with things that in a large part I had stopped living since the accident. And it was being there in those circumstances, sitting across the table from these women, that in a very real way brought me back to life. It put something in front of me, a harm, a pain, that I had an awareness in me, that I had a skill, I had something that could help, that I had these tools of yoga and meditation and art and writing that have helped me cope. And so in a very real way, they gave me a reason to live.
Wow. Thank you for sharing such heavy reality, heavy experiences with us, the listeners. I can only imagine the daily challenges that you continue to work through. You mentioned though that you went in the cell as Claire and you came out as Anya-Kara. So that speaks to a transformation that you underwent. And that resonates with me, those transformations we undergo when we are in prison, because I think went through similar type transformations, new understanding, new definitions of who I am and who I want to be.
Mm.
You also spoke about already having tools that helped you cope. And so I wanted to ask you if you could speak a little bit about how did creating art while incarcerated help you cope with the emotional and psychological toll of confinement? And at the same time, how did you use that art to help the other women around you? Or if it wasn't art, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I never really thought of myself as an artist. I think we live in this Western society where we have a definition of who an artist is and who an artist isn't. And we have a definition of what makes good art. And there's only certain kinds, and it looks certain ways, and it's presented in certain ways. And it wasn't until I had lost my son, and 6 months beforehand, I had lost my second child as a stillbirth. It was that I was exposed to using art in a grief art therapy kind of capacity and began understanding that art wasn't really about what was made or what other people would think about what was made or judging it, but that it was really about giving an outlet to everything that lived inside of me, that there was all of this pain and all of this tension and for many of the things that I was trying to hold, they were things that couldn't be changed. So, what do you do then when you're left with this impotence, this inability to write anything? You can't go back and change anything, no matter how much you would wish to. That there is no way of making it right. And so, all you're left with is this pain and learning how to carry that pain. And art provided for me a way of taking it from inside of myself and putting it onto the page and working with it outside of my own body. There is a beautiful quote by an artist. Her name is Ehime Ora, that a friend sent to me while I was incarcerated. She talks about how pain isn't meant to be carried inside of us. So to put it in our art, to put it in our writing, to put it into music and dance and community, building relationships. And she says, our bodies are not coffins for our pain to be buried in, but put it somewhere else. And that line in particular, just to hear it so clearly stated, like, my body is not a coffin. This pain is not meant to live here forever. And so that was really what brought me to art, was this moment of just complete surrender, of an inability to do anything. And so when you can't do something, it leaves us either needing to numb and reaching for, whether that's drugs or alcohol or sex or shopping or busyness, running in some capacity to numb the very real experience of pain in our bodies, or finding ways to express and outlet and move it through us. So that was really the beginning for me. And so I had about a good year of receiving support in therapeutic spaces to learn different techniques of art, from therapeutic, like line drawing, that's just for mindfulness and stress reduction, to creative outlets such as collaging or painting with watercolor and things like that, that were in my toolbox for when I found myself there in that cell. I can really only describe it as a moment of surrender, of when there is nothing left to do, and when you're locked in a cell and there's nowhere to go. And I spent most of my time on a lockdown facility. So we're spending 20 hours plus a day in a 6 by 12 cell. What do you do? Like, there's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go. There's something about reaching for that blank page and that pen and just following the pen and giving myself over to the page. And it was both a release and it was an affirmation. I had created something. My humanity, my existence couldn't be denied because here was tangible proof that I am real. And I am more than this number, the scanning thing that I wear on my wrist. You beat me in and out when you feed me, when you escort me places, that I am more than this mugshot. I am something beautiful and I am something real. So I kind of began organically sharing that with the other women. Life behind bars is privacy is a thing that just doesn't exist. So everybody always is up in your business, whether it's your phone calls or your messages or so, I'm sitting there at this table and the women are walking around being like, what are you doing? And why bother? Like, what is this? All these, that's weird. For a while, people called me a witch. And I was like, you know what? That's great. And then there started to be this curiosity like, well, we see you. We see how calm you are. We see how you're reacting and responding when things are going sideways, when raids are happening, when all the stuff that happens behind bars is happening. They were looking at me and seeing me be able to remain my own self, to be centered and grounded. And they started to become curious, like how? And beginning to just offer, here's a blank page, here's a pen. Every once in a while, I would teach a therapeutic type of drawing, something that helps just relax and release tension. And a lot of the other times, I simply listened. Many of the women who became a part of the program that evolved began by simply coming to sit next to me. I say, well, I'm not an artist. I can't, but I just like being around you. Like, you're so calm. Your energy is so good. Like, can I just sit next to you? Of course. Sit next to me while I draw, while I breathe, while I am. And I think it speaks to the influence of the spaces we find ourselves in and the power that we as individuals have to influence our environments no matter where we find ourselves. That did I solve all of the issues on my unit? No. Was there an impact that did happen organically, slowly, that in the time that I was there, we changed the culture on our unit? And that was reflected in the women who run the restorative justice program and the yoga program and the deputies saying, wow, we're not having fights. We're not having this happen. And so I think that belief in just continuing to show up and be.
It sounds like your engagement in artwork really served as a form of resistance in some regard, healing, um, and maybe even a communication of sorts. But I'm wondering, and maybe we can, with this question, go into the artwork that you brought to the art show here in North Carolina a couple of months ago. And my question is, can you talk about the themes that you explore most in your artwork and how those themes have um, may have been shaped by your experience with incarceration or your hopes for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. It was such an honor to be able to come to North Carolina and to participate in the Rekindling and Restoration art show with my piece, Draw Your Soul Free. And that piece really shared the narrative of my experience, I believe. So in that experience when I was there, of that organic growing and sharing of the art and the storytelling practices with the women, there was a significant shift when we made a collaboration with the restorative justice program. I had the great pleasure and honor of having worked for the same nonprofit that the woman who runs the restorative justice program at the jail did back in the day. And so she was a familiar face when I walked into that classroom. And as I got reconnected with her and the passion of the restorative justice movement and the hope we hold for the future of our carceral system in the United States, it really began to spark for me this connection between the work that was happening back on our unit, where already we were seeing the impact of not only were the women coming together to make art and reduce our stress and all of these kinds of things, which are in and of itself amazing and enough, but there was something additional that was happening that was just magical, and that was that they were sharing their stories. And there's this Sanskrit teaching, it's called Tattvam Asi, for I am that. And it's this moment of connection at our deepest level, where we are meeting being to being. And so often we have these structures that we put around ourselves to protect ourselves, our identities, and art and storytelling are an avenue to break through and shatter those walls that we've built, to see behind those walls that we've built for ourselves, as well as this other person. And all of a sudden, this person that we were fighting with, this person that we were getting into all this drama with, they shared a story where we see ourselves. Well, that happened to you too, that happened to me. Or even if it didn't happen to me, even just imagining what that experience would be like and how that would change you as a being. Say, of course you're angry. Of course you've got anger issues. Like, no shit, if that had happened to me. And so it just allows us to be together as human beings instead of these fractious at war. And that was really the moment on our unit where we went from fights breaking out daily to the guards having to come in with their pepper spray guns and people being thrown on the floor, and like all just to that hardly ever happening. And when it did happen, it didn't happen to that scale. The women were forming a village where they were looking out for each other. And instead of sparking off together, if somebody sparked off, there'd be somebody else reaching out and saying, hey, you seem to be having a rough day. You want to come over and sit down and chat? Or, hey, let's draw together for a little while. Here's some paper, here's some pens, in this way of changing the culture that I think many of those women had never experienced before. Brought an idea full circle to the restorative justice program and sharing that experience with Greta and her saying, well, maybe we could create a community circle, bringing in deputies, bringing in the sheriffs, bringing in the judges, bringing in the press, these people who have a certain relationship and identity for the people who they are locking away. What would happen if we brought them into circle and the women could share these stories that they're writing, these art that they're making, and those individuals could bring stories of their own and art that they had made. And I can't really tell you the difference that invitation made to the women, especially to the women who knew that they were not going home, the women who knew that they were going to be serving long sentences. Initially, it began as, for me, I'm going to share my story so the judge will change his sentence for me. To really work with the women and to be a role model for that. It's not about us. It's not about me and my story. This is an opportunity to change the system for those who are going to come after us, for our daughters, for our granddaughters, for the men, for the women who are going to be coming. This is more to speak to the wider issue of we are human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what really stood out to me as you described, creating a circle and inviting sheriffs and staff and attorneys to the circle. It gives a chance for incarcerated people to be seen as human and not as felons or convicts or inmates or whatever other epithets are thrown at those of us who find ourselves incarcerated. So
Yeah.
that's pretty powerful.
I was not able to actually be at that circle. So that
Mm,
circle ended up happening after I was released. And there is a policy that felons are not allowed back in. And so when I knew that I wasn't going to be there at that circle, that was where my work began to diverge, but also
mm,
to continue and to say, like, what is my role to play here? And that my role was going to be I'm coming home, but I'm not leaving you behind. And so that was for me where I created Draw Your Soul Free
mm,
from was I dedicated it to the women there. I told them all about it. They were a part of choosing the artwork that went into it. They were a part of picking which of my poetry and which of my pieces made it into the final. They were imbued in every aspect of that it became a we project. It just happened to be that I was the one entrusted to carry it beyond the walls, and that it continues now. Those women, I am one of the few that's home, but I
mm,
continue my relationship with many of them, and we continue to share writing prompts that I send each month with them,
mm,
and they send back poetry and stories that they've written. They share with me how they use art, and they've started art programs there at the women's prison, greatly inspired by what we started at the jail. And to know that it was the empowerment of self that allowed them. And that was what I hope that my art can do and my work can do, is not for it to be about my work, but for
mm,
it to be, I hope that my work is an inspiration for the person who reads it or sees it or touches it, to know that it's an invitation, that
mm,
within them is all of the answers that they need, the wisdom, the knowledge, the courage. It is them. And so I hope that it's an invitation for them to put the pen to the paper and to author their own story in a world that often wants to tell us who we are, who
mm,
we should be. Here's your label. Here's your places you can go and you can't go, where you can work, where you can live, what you
mm.
are capable of and what you are not capable of. And to say, Bullocks, you are the only one who decides.
You saying that, especially the part about the invitation and the encouragement, makes me think of the late great American poet Tupac Amaru Shakur once said, I may not change the world, but I want to spark the mind that will change the world. I want to encourage the person that changes the world.
Yeah.
And so, Anya-Kara, we're coming up about maybe a little less than 10 minutes left in our time together. And one last thing I will want to ask, well, two last things. And one is, what do you want people to feel or understand after experiencing your art, especially those who have never been directly impacted by incarceration.
I think I hold a twofold vision for my work. The first is for the people who are themselves incarcerated or have been impacted by the justice system to truly feel that there are those of us in the world, there's someone in the world who sees them as more than the labels and who is wishing for them to stand in their power and for them to define themselves for no one and nothing other than their own self. And for many of us, we don't have people like that in our lives. And so I hope that my work can be that presence in their world if they don't have someone outside already saying that to them, that there is someone in the world who believes it, and not because life has been easy or life has been perfect or that I have not myself made my own mistakes, but from that very, very humble position of living after things have gone very wrong. And then the secondary is for those who haven't been incarcerated. And I hope that my voice and my work can break through the barriers of separation. The only way that we allow our incarceral system to function as it does is because we have this separation, this barrier that otherizes these beings to such an extent that we don't even see them as human anymore. Because if we saw them as human, we would not allow them to be treated in the way that we do. And so that is really my goal of being in the world and sharing this work, is to put a face and a name and a voice to say that, look me in the eye and say those things. Don't say them behind a computer screen. Don't say them behind a number. Look me as the being that I am, and know that all those who are still there are just as I am.
A human being, someone deserving of respect, someone deserving of dignity. In closing, how can people find your work and or contact you if they want to follow up with you?
Sure, thank you. Yes, so there's two ways. Drawyoursoulfree.com is one way. Thanks to collaboration with the Human Kindness Foundation, Draw Your Soul Free is available as a free PDF and video download, and it is offered a free use. So it can be modified or used for any purpose for personal use or to bring to your organization. And there is a contact form on that website if you'd like to talk further about bringing Draw Your Soul Free or art into your organization. I would love to collaborate. And then I also run a Substack. It is called Meditations in Blue. So meditationsinblue.substack.com is the link to that. And that is simply my journals and art from my time incarcerated. The purpose of sharing those is for myself to remember where I came from, where Anya-Kara was birthed, and the purpose and reason for my existence, as well as continuing to pull back this veil for those who have not themselves been incarcerated. What is the daily life like? What is the lived experience in a very raw and unfiltered? The journals are unedited and as human can get. And yeah, so you can sign up there or send messages there on Substack as well.
Right on. Anya-Kara, it's been an honor to have you as a guest here on the Prison to Promise podcast. I look forward to remaining in communication with you and in community with you. So, with our last minute, I'm going to give you a moment to say anything that you might need to say, but you might get cut off.
All right. I just want to say thank you to you for having me, and to everyone who's listening. It is an incredible act of bravery and courage to begin to believe and to know that there's a community here waiting to support you.
Right on. And with that, we'll call it a wrap.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for your time. Hey, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the Prison to Promise podcast, please contact me at drcraigwaleed@gmail.com. I'll spell it out. That's DrCraigWaleE, as in Edward, D as in David, at gmail.com. Dr. Craig Waleed, DrCraigWaleed at gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us here on the Prison to Promise podcast. I look forward to hearing back from you. Peace.